I would actually like to begin with our counselor that we have with us. And if you could simply share with us, we understand that this is a very traumatic event, but could you speak to us about the impact that can have, trauma like this can have on children, on adults, and how that manifests in your proximity to the trauma? For example, those directly involved and those who feel those reverberations.
Right. So sometimes people think that PTSD is only for adults, but it is very, very, very real for adolescents and children, even up to the age of 3. It's looked at differently when it's children. So they have the nightmares, but it's not the nightmares where you see what happened, but it's reoccurring dreams of death or having this fear of, I'm not gonna live to the next year. They kind of, they have outbursts, they're hypersensitive because they don't know what happened. They don't know why it happened. It's hard to talk about. And so they kind of show their hurt through their behaviors, but they will never vocalize exactly what they're feeling. And that makes it tough on them because they don't know what's going on. And so when it comes to these children that had to witness that, just going to school on a normal day, I mean, it's something that will last for a long time for them, and it'll take a lot of therapy for them, but it's something that's so important and it can get better. These memories won't go away, but you can look back at these memories and not feel as much, not hurt as much, not go into tears, but understand that it happened, but I'm here today, and I still have my family. And then there's the sides of the parents where they're worried that I just let my kid go to school and look what happened. And so while they're trying to protect their children that just went through this, they're also going through trauma themselves because they're having to be that protector and hide their crying and hide their worry without letting their children see, and to be that strong person to go to a grocery store with your child, to go to ice cream with your child, and you don't trust anywhere you go. Where do you go with that? Into isolation, which will only create more depression and will only make the problem bigger. It's something that's tragic, unfortunate, and I feel like that's not even the right verbiage or adjectives to describe something like this. But I like to think that as humans, we do bleed, but that also means we're resilient. And you can hear all the quotes about a smooth sea never made a skilled sailor, but it's a different story when it comes to death and losing your loved ones. But look at where we're at right now. There's other people out there that don't live in Uvalde, but we are here in support of them to try to figure out some change and action for them. Trauma is real for children. Trauma is real for adults and those parents and even family members. But there's something we can do about it. It might take time, but we're humans and we can do it. But it doesn't mean that it's gonna be all sunshine and rainbows. And I think that makes it beautiful as a human race. Did that answer your question?
It does. What about how that reverberates? Some might feel or think that if perhaps one is not as directly involved, that one may not feel as much of an impact, but some of us out here, I know I do not presume to feel what those feel who have been directly impacted, but can you talk a little bit about how this reverberates in our community?
Probably, if I understand the question correctly, awareness, unity, the belief in good, but understand there is bad, but knowing that you need both to really live this life. And again, with everyone here, we're here for a reason, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's all the proof that we need that us as humans, whether we're close to proximity or not, we can bind together and work together to lift each other up. Did that work?
Thank you for that. And I think that's the perfect segue for us to hear from Mendel as someone who is a part of the Uvalde community before we touch back with our panelists here with us. Mendel, do you feel comfortable speaking about sometimes I call it the temperature of the room there in Uvalde? I will leave that to you and how you feel comfortable speaking.
First, I wanted to express my enormous gratitude and appreciation for what you and your students have done. It was compelling. It touched on so many buttons that I've been aware of. You have shared so many stories from so many points of view and so many vantage points, and you raised those awful questions about the 77 minutes and the lack of action and all those things that torment and haunt us. We had a meeting here earlier today, and one of the fathers was here. And that was his continuing question: why? Why was nothing done? And we do not have an answer to that, and I think we never will. I guess that I want to use my word as devastated. I grew up in Uvalde. I did not attend Robb Elementary, but my late aunt was a teacher there for over 40 years. So it's very personal to me. We have 9 people on our payroll in our small library. 4 of them either lost a niece, a cousin, or a granddaughter's best friend. So it has hit us very directly, everyone in town. I loved what the therapist said about helping each other, because I had a very long evening on the night of the 24th, what to do about the library. Should we open tomorrow? Should we be closed? Well, what was the proper response? I mean, this is unscripted. There's no playbook for this kind of horror. Unimaginable, unspeakable, unthinkable. I knew we couldn't really do anything for the children who had been killed and were so badly injured, but I thought the others, the children that are too young to know, they can't understand. I can't understand. You can't understand. This is just an unthinkable event. But after I wrestled with it, I decided what we had to do is to move forward, to help each other, to try to provide that safe haven, that place of refuge, of respite for the community. Because, you know, the traditional role of the library is always to educate, to inform, to offer recreation, and to inspire. So that was our response. And the outpouring of love that has come, just as the love that went into this amazing production that you all have shared with us tonight. People have come from all over the United States and beyond to offer comfort in every imaginable form and some unimaginable. We got a box of dog toys. Please don't ask me why, but somebody sent a box of dog toys. We've received almost 9,000 books. We've received a lot of money, unsolicited, unexpected, unplanned, but we've created Los Angelitos de Robb so that we can have an endowment for the children's room. That money is going to go a long way helping children in the future, because we can provide for them now in ways that we couldn't have before. So I can't speak for the whole community, but I would say with the slow passage of time, there is healing. People are going forward because you have to in life. You can't go back and you can't stand still. You have to move forward. So we're trying to find the most positive ways that we can do that and to make Uvalde the community that it was before. This event happened. It's undeniable. It's the most awful thing, unimaginable thing, but it cannot define this community. It cannot define us, that we are so much more than that. So with the help of people like you all reaching out and trying to offer your love and support and concern in many very various ways, we will survive this. We will move forward. Never the same, but we will move forward, and we'll do the best we can to help those who remain in the community. Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing those words with us, Mendel.
Ayvaunn knows that if I have anything, I have opinions. I saw this great quote this week from Maya Angelou that speaks to this very issue, and it's interesting that we're connected with the library in Uvalde, because when she gave all of her papers to, I believe it was the New York City Public Library, but please don't quote me on that, she had this broadcast conversation with one of the curators there, and she said that libraries are this totally democratic repository for stories. And in the same way, the theater is a repository for stories. Libraries share stories, we share stories in the theater. But she said, the whole point of all of it is that we're all the same. We are all the same, fundamentally. She said the details change, but we are all fundamentally the same. And if you are open to that, if you're not open to that, then you're probably not even in a place where you're seeing a play about hard-hitting issues. You're seeing bells are ringing or something. But thank you very much, I appreciate that. But you have to be open to it. But once you say we all are fundamentally the same, and the loss of a child is so unthinkable that we don't even have a word for it in English. We have widow, we have widower, we have orphan, but we do not have a word for a parent who has lost a child. So if we go, what would I do in that situation? What if I was in that situation? We almost can't even think about it. It's almost like our brains don't let us. So we see something like this and it's, oh, I need to do something about that. I can't just, it's not just a story on the news. Yeah.
So one question, are there any questions at this time before we proceed? Yes, there's a question.
I have a heavy weight every time I hear someone say mental illness when this type activity happens. And so I guess I just do not see a link between hate and mental illness. And I'm not sure how to put that into a question, but I'm hoping you can comment on it.
I think if your question might be, how do we as a society differentiate between acts of cold blood and acts that come about due to a mental illness?
I can answer that. So that's a really good point, and I'm glad you brought it up because I feel like that's, if we're going to be completely transparent here, almost a scapegoat for the news, for the people that are higher up, because they can't say what it is, what it really is. You look at the DSM, and that's where you get all the mental disorders. You see the comorbidities, you see the symptoms, you see the characteristics. There is not one mental disorder in the DSM that says that a symptom or something you should look out for is murder or a mass shooting. There is not one mental disorder. You want to go to the more severe ones, and there's absolutely no, label or box when I say this, but think of the most severe in your head of the mental disorder, whatever it is. It's not on there. It's not. They'll say that some mental disorders, because you had a traumatic childhood, because your parents didn't give you enough attention, because you had to always earn your way, you might get certain disorders, but none of them say that you're going to go and kill. Actually, majority of them, they're more of a threat to themselves than to others. So when they say that it's a mental illness, since we've kind of already talked about it through song and theater, I believe it's just a label, it's a box, wrap it up, let's keep going.
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Were you going to share something?
I was wrapped up, but.
No. What's really interesting about that is that there's a lot of research now that's being conducted, social science research being conducted by physicians, trauma surgeons, emergency room doctors, who are now beginning to hold up a mirror to what this really means for us. And I think what's interesting about it is that a lot more of them are settling on this idea of despair, which isn't a mental illness. It's a condition in life, like loneliness and sadness. Sadness can turn into a mental illness. But I think that it's also a commentary on where we're at as a society and why we so commonly dismiss that in other people, And you're right. I think the play made a really, really good point that the solution is partly political, but I also think it's societal. And so how do we see each other? The fact that we live in a society that we're very easily isolated from one another, which is just exacerbates so many of the conditions that we talk about. There's a project at Hamline University in Minnesota, the Violence Project, where they're actually doing a very forensic deep dive into why people engage in mass shootings. And by and large, the reasons are he lost his job and his wife told him to leave. And overwhelmingly, it's males too. It's unfortunate. Like I said, I'm a social scientist, so I'm always reading these things. And it really saddens me to think that, you know, the power actors in society are the ones who are actually carrying out the violence against innocent people.
Incredible food for thought. Before we chart on, any thoughts or comments from our members in the audience?
I have one question. As someone who's just an average Joe or Jane sitting in their home right now, watching this or watching their news, I know oftentimes people tend to feel very helpless in situations like these or in the aftermath of anything similar to this. What can the average person do if they said, I want to make a change, I want to help bring about a change? What can the average person do in order to help bring about that change or to do their part?
Vote.
Yeah, vote for people who you know have the best interests of society at heart. They're going to cloud it with a lot of political mumbo jumbo a lot of the time. But at the end of the day, the question that I like to ask of elected officials, are you willing to live with the death and destruction that guns cause in our society? I'm not an anti-Second Amendment individual by any stretch of the imagination, but I just look at the results. You know, the 300 million guns in our society, more than there are people just about in this country alone. You know, and this is what's ironic. I read something on an article not too long ago. You know, Great Britain's known for its tea. The French are known for their bread. We're known for our guns.
To that point, I would, yes, vote, and yes, the repercussions that come just by default of having surplus of armory in society and circulating. Aside from voting, what are other things that we can do to care for our fellow human being, those everyday acts that might be small but make a difference? We might all have an idea of what we think that is, but while we have some experts on our panel, what might be your suggestions?
One of the biggest lessons that to me comes from all of the performing arts, not just theater, is listening. We live in a society right now that talking is so prized, and the louder you talk, the more you sort of win. And I wonder if part of, to use your word, this despair, even desperation people are feeling, so often characters in plays, characters in operas, when they really are feeling that it's because they're not being heard, they're not being listened to. And is that a fundamental issue in society?
For sure. You make such a very good point with that as we think from the realm of art. Yes, listening and wanting to be heard. So checking in with our counselor as well. These daily acts, listening and what? So for example, the person who perpetrated this crime, you know, we're in our everyday lives. Let's say this person is in and around us. What are ways we can be proactive in checking in? You know, you see things on social media, check in with your friends around you, check in with your family. Don't make people have to reach out to you always. Sometimes it can be hard to ask for help. So in addition to voting, in addition to listening, so key, what are some of those other action steps we might be able to take?
So what comes to mind for me first are support groups. And that doesn't mean it has to be in a clinical setting. It doesn't mean it has to be closed or open. This could be you and your family. This could be you and your friends. It could be out at lunch. It doesn't have to be in this kind of cold or, formal setting. It's all about unity, right? Especially in times like this. So it's having to be vulnerable, because if you don't talk about it, it just adds up in your head. If you keep the silence to keep the peace, then you start a war in your own head. And that's dangerous. And then you get into a cave, and then you feel to a certain point that I don't want to talk about it anymore. I don't want it to come up because it's so far deep into your system and in your brain. And the second thing I thought of was this quote, and it just says, your problems or your wounds were probably not your fault, but your healing is your responsibility. And I feel like that is the best way to kind of approach and think about it on top of everything else. Because it first starts with your mindset and understanding what is your responsibility, what is in your control, and who has your back and who is willing to listen.
Thank you for that.
I think this question will be for the counselor. There's been asked, what can we do in a day-to-day situation to prevent these things? And I've heard about the guns, but I've not heard anything about when we allow the kids to have all these violent games that they are prevalent all the time. They grow, they get, I forgot the word, but it doesn't affect them anymore. They don't think, the sensitizers, right? They don't think death is death, because then, I want to talk about, you will say something about that, of what it does to a child's brain to play with things that are violent.
Okay. I understand your question, and it's a very good question. So there's something called the Walmart theory, and it was this research about, depending on certain Walmarts around the nation, how much they sold guns, where they put the selling of guns, and how much that affect how many guns were being sold, and then what was the crime like in that area. It showed that the closer it was to the register, the closer it was when you walked in, the more people bought it, and the more crime there was in those areas or cities. So that's one part of the research. There's another part that says maybe people who have bumper stickers or something on the back of their car, and it could be a picture of a gun. That alone, research shows, will make people feel more violent just from seeing it on the back of a car. And that's just seeing it for a split second, let alone the video games. You're onto something when they will get desensitized. But then we're dealing with a whole nother beast, and that is all the people that make these video games profit off of this, and then the social media part attached to it. There's so many working parts to that, but at the same time, you are right. Just seeing one gun for a second will make you more violent, whether that's honking on the horn, having a little bit more of, what is it called when you're driving and road rage. That alone can incite that. So what we can do about it goes above probably our heads or going out and making legislation about it, but that is a fact. Just by seeing it for a split second will make you more violent, just by a little.
I think it does call for leadership in society of individuals who are aware that so much of our lives really we're subjected to serial dehumanization. We have so many things on a daily basis that really kind of, minimize who we are as humans. And I think we need to have people who are willing to stand up, a la Maya Angelou, who was very, very eloquent in really lifting not only her humanity, but the humanity of others. And this is why the arts are so beautiful, because they do that on the regular. And this is why, as a social scientist, that's where I find my comfort. And yet we don't have enough people in society who are extolling the value and the virtues of what the arts, what music, what literature does for the human soul, what it does for the mind. And we've allowed these, other industries to really kind of take the place of those things as, that we had previous. Not saying that everything in the past was hunky-dory. Nowhere, not at all. But what I'm hoping, and I'm very hopeful, I'm hoping that we can develop cadres of leadership, and maybe through an institution like TCU, of people who acknowledge these things, are aware and willing to do things on a daily basis to kind of lift humanity, because I think that's the challenge right now. That's the challenge.
Absolutely. Really fascinating what the two of you have shared in this moment. Yes, the power of the arts for our artists in the room. I just had a conversation with my students just yesterday. I asked how many of you feel that art can change the world. And about half of them raised their hand yes, and then half raised their hand no. And I asked our students who said no, why do you feel that is? And the student said, I think like this percent of the society is actually really paying attention to what art is saying to us. And then I said, well, the other students said, oh no, you told the theater professor you don't believe art will change the world. What will she do? And I said, I am in no way offended. I am not here to police your thoughts, but let's look at the evidence of what we see in our society. I said, how many of you have a favorite movie? How many of you have a favorite TV show? How many of you have a favorite music artist? How many of you have a favorite character in there that you really kind of want it to be like? How many of you made some life choices based on who you wanted to be like, who you thought was cool, who you thought was awesome? There are people who choose careers because they, saw Legally Blonde or something and they were inspired. You might look at it and think of it as bubblegum art or bubblegum drama, but a part of what I teach our students is that there's no such thing as art that doesn't say anything. It all is saying something, even if you look at it as, what you look at as just, I'm being entertained. It's all a commentary on the world around us, and it really is true that art reflects life, and life reflects art. And I believe, I always forget the artist's name, but he said that art shows us what life can be. Mm-hmm. It shows us. And even just, now I'm getting to my lecture brain, but what was it? A part of why theater it still exists and is around, and there's this idea or theory that we like to, as humans, control the way the story will end. And whereas we can't control how it ends in life, when we create a narrative, when we craft a story, when we create art, we're allowed to put into that world what we wish could be. And when we share that, we reveal to the world what life can be. And so in the spirit of not keeping us here too long into the night, if folk have questions, comments, please throw your hand in the air. Panelists, if you have something you want to share, please do. But otherwise, I would have us end on this note, a quote by Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright Ayad Akhtar. Got to bring the playwrights in there tonight, right? Okay, Ayad Akhtar, he wrote this play called Disgraced. Any folks in the room familiar with Disgraced? Maybe, kind of, sort of. Yes, Walter, yes. Okay. But this play looks at 9/11 and tensions between those who I identify with or grew up in the Middle East, Middle Eastern culture, people who are Jewish, identify as such of that culture, and the myriad of how we identify in the United States. So it's a really tough play that looks at really raw emotions, holds nothing back. There are some jaw droppers in there. But in the back of the play, I draw to my students' attention this quote. The playwright was asked some things, what do you want your play to do? What do you want to happen? And probably something along the lines of, do you think this is going to change the way people think about people, places, things, right? And Ayad said, the Ayvaunn remix, okay? Art will not, I don't think art will change the world. Like, I don't think it's gonna revolutionize it. I don't necessarily think that if someone sees this play, they will be changed by time they walk through the doors and go to their cars or get on the train if you're in New York and go home. But what I do believe art does is it opens people's eyes to the reality of what is. And that is so important, that the first step in change, as we think about theater for social change and applied theater, as you say, art in the humanities is showing us ourselves and lifting our spirits in what it can do, that in addition to these things, it shows us what is. It holds up a mirror to society and shows us the beautiful, it shows us the ugly. And the first step in change is realizing there's a problem. And even if, as you know, theater for social change is tough, you know, not everyone's always like ready to go out there and tap into that. But what I always remember is that sowing the seed, that when you plant the seed, when that awareness is raised, even if someone doesn't walk out of the doors immediately transfigured, that seed being planted is then able to be watered by life as they continue to experience, hear the testimonies of others, and heaven forbid, experience something themselves. But planting the seed is so key.
I really think you did that. I'm talking to you as a playwright. I'm also a new play script doctor as well, so I was literally sitting with both hats today. And one of the things that really captured me about your play is the rhythm of each of the characters that you were able to capture and how you wrote them so differently. So by the time we get to the doctor, and it is medical, and it is what has to be. I am a wife of a doctor. It was like looking through the telescope of the play and seeing the mirage of people that you were starting to put together for us, from the songs to the poetry to the imagery. And I really thought, wow, she's giving voice to all of this community, to all of these people. She gave voice to the desks that were present and witness. And I found that to be amazingly captivating. So thank you. Thank you for your artistry.
Thank you for sharing that with me. James, you look like you're going to say something.
I was just appreciating what you...
All right, folks. Well, I think it's great to, it looks like Mendel has parted from us. Great to call, a good place to call it a night. Thank you so much to our panelists, our actors. Please do go through and check out the program. My heart is full with everyone who has rallied around this work to give it voice, bring it to life. But I want you to know everyone who helped to make it possible. So yes, you can scan the QR codes outside, and you can also go to fortheloveofuvalde.org, and the program is there. Love and thanks to you all. Go forth and be great, as I tell my students. Go forth and be great. Thank you.